How you guys doing? Awesome. All right, so today we're going to hang out and we're going to talk about broadening your impact with some data-driven demographics analysis. So my name is Marguerite Dibble. I work at a company called Game Theory, and
turn the mic down a little bit.
Yes, blasting everybody.
Let's try that.
Awesome. Is there any way we can mirror that so I don't have to cheat and stare?
Unfortunately,
That's okay.
I cannot.
I'll just crank my neck. It's all
Sorry.
good. No offense to everybody. I'd love to look to your beautiful faces, but I'm just going to reference the screen as well. All right, so I run a company called Game Theory, and at Game Theory, what we do is we change behavior with games, which I bet a lot of people in this room can relate to. And really what we want to do, right, is we want to motivate people to take actions. We want to motivate people to learn new things, to build new skills, to take new steps. And the way that we want to do that is we want to make that a fun experience. But fun is flexible, right? Fun is kind of different depending on who you are. For example, there's me, right? I really like games like Majora's Mask, Dragon Age Inquisition. I really like Overwatch. So the games that I play are focused on skills, story, completion is a big motivator for me. But then there's people like my mom, right? And she's 52, and she really likes crossword puzzles. She also lost her mind over that Halloween Google Doodle from last year. Does anyone know this one with the little cat that was casting the spells? She just loved it and played it for days and called me and was like, this is what games should be. And she also really loved the Dream Daddy Dad Maker. Has anyone played Dream Daddy yet? In this game, you get to make a dad from scratch with an avatar creator, and she just had the best time ever doing that. She loved it. And she told me, I've never had this much fun. This is what all games should be. And I was like, great, that's good. And then there's my dad, right, who's 63, and he just plays letterpress. Like, I told him about letterpress 4 years ago, and he just plays it every single day over and over again, obsessively. And I asked about playing other games, and he said, yeah, but you know, I have these relationships with people through letterpress, and I can't abandon those. So I'm going to keep playing letterpress. And I was like, okay, Dad. So what are these differences all about, right? There's obviously differences between how people play games and what they enjoy and what's different. And so what we're excited to do is analyze that a little bit and say, okay, why do people like different things and what are those differences? So we use a couple of tools to do this. The first tool we use is this big fat data set that we have. So this is a data set from a group called Quantic Foundry, which is a really awesome group that I would recommend you guys check out. They do really good blog posts. They have a polling base of about 270,000 gamers. So they put a survey out that's called, what type of gamer are you? And people can answer these questions. And this gives us a really good data set from which to understand. It's obviously limited to a certain extent because these are people who are self-identifying as game players, which we don't always need to reach those people with our products. But it's still a really cool set to reference. So what they ask is, what makes games fun? And this is some of the data that comes out of that polling. So we can see a couple of cool, interesting things from this. These are different game mechanics and what percentage of people are most motivated by those different mechanics. So a couple things that stand right out. Obviously, competition is much higher as a engager for male audiences, whereas completion, fantasy, and design are much stronger for female audiences, which is interesting. You can also see that non-binary individuals resonate very strongly with the fantasy and design elements. And in pretty much all instances, the non-binary and identifying individuals mimic the female patterns, except for with a couple areas like competition, where it's closer to the male patterns. It's really cool to be able to see some of the differences. Challenge is another one that's higher for male players, along with excitement and strategy. Then we can look at it in terms of age. So again, I would recommend Quantic Foundry because it breaks down a whole bunch of different ages besides just the very generic 36 plus, but we're very short on time today, so we'll just look at it this way. One of the interesting things here is obviously that competition is much more popular with younger players, according to their data set. You can also see that things like fantasy and discovery are more popular as people age. Challenge is also more popular with people who are younger. So you can see how some of these values sort of trade on and off as we age, and that can be really informative. So what's some stuff we can learn from this? There's some interesting conclusions we can draw. One of the things that we see in this data is that Female and non-binary players have far more polarized tastes. There are things that they hate, and there are things that they love. And part of this might not be because the game mechanics work or don't work for them. Part of this could be because the things they don't like have not been something that caters to them. They tend to be things that are made by male dev studios and marketed with things like male protagonists. So that could be a factor for some of those genres that don't score and cause those really polarizing results. Another thing is that competition is really powerful. Some people are extremely motivated by competition, but it can be very polarizing. Some people really hate it, and they really don't want to feel that kind of pressure in a game experience. Another thing is that completion is pretty broad. That sense of satisfaction we get when we check everything off a list, that's something that most players really like and respond to. So that can be a unifying mechanic in the games that you design. We can look at some other cool stats. This breaks down different genres of game and what their percentage of female and non-binary players are. There's been a lot of contention around the number of about 50-50 male to female players. And so this really shows how that breaks down. Yes, there's a lot of female players in the match 3 and family or farm simulation categories, but you can also see pretty good representation in a bunch of other ones. A cool example is that fantasy-based MMOs have almost double the female player populations as sci-fi MMOs, which I thought was an interesting difference. And you can also see that for non-binary players, this atmospheric exploration type of game, things like Journey and Abzu, score really highly. Some interesting outliers come out of this data set. Something that's worth noting is just that sometimes it might not be the type of game, but the way it's portrayed. For example, in the fantasy RPG space, typically that's 26% female players, but Dragon Age gets 48% female players. So Dragon Age is making choices that engage women far more than its competitors. Same with Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Typically, sci-fi MMOs only have 16% female players, but they're hitting 29% because of their design choices. So some lower scoring genres for female and non-binary are shooters, sports, and racing. You can draw a couple conclusions from this. First, a lot of these games have male protagonists. A lot of these games require interaction with strangers online, which could be a deterrent for these populations. They also involve a lot of high-speed motion, and it's been shown that women are more susceptible to motion sickness in games than men. Some other random fun stats that I thought were cool from this big data set. Idle clickers are actually only 10% casual players. Most of the people who play those idle clicker games are actually core or hardcore players, which I thought was kind of weird and interesting. Another one is that there's no real difference between men and women in violent games. Women like to kill you just as much as men do in video games. They just use completely different tools to do so. So when this was polled, they found that women liked to commit violence with their hands, swords, and magic, whereas male players like to use guns and explosives. So setting and tools actually are more resonant than just the fact that is there violence or is there not violence. And then finally, local co-op is pretty universally appealing. I think we've all had really positive local co-op experiences, and you can see despite age or gender that the experience of sitting down together at a game and all playing in front of the TV is really fun for a lot of people. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to counter this large-scale data that pulls gamers in high numbers with something that was a little bit closer to home for us. So we made our own internal survey through MTurk, and we positioned it much more as how do games engage you, and we didn't make it feel like you had to be a gamer to participate, because we felt like that was a bit of a limiting component of the data we had, and we wanted to broaden it. So it's not as big of a data set, but it's a little more open, and it presented us with some cool findings. So we had 3 overarching factors when we did our factor analysis in terms of why people played. The first one was social. A lot of people just like playing games because it's a cool social experience. The next one was story and character. So a lot of people, that's their highest motivator when they play a game. And the last one was that ability to build skills and use them in competition. This was some of our findings in terms of gender breakdown. We didn't have any non-binary respondents, so that's not factored in here. You can see that the #1 reason people said they wanted to play games was to relax and to have a challenge, which is kind of hypocritical, right? But I think it comes together to create the picture of what we love the most about games, is you can chill out and you can relax with something that is challenging for you personally. Some interesting differences here I found were the sense of improvement, so skills-based stuff was more popular with men, whereas this idea of achievement was more popular with women. So where male players were saying, I like the idea of being able to build my skills, female players said, I like getting a reward, I like feeling like I accomplished something, which was an interesting difference. Another interesting difference was fantasy and role-playing and sort of escapism ranked really high with our male polls. And then looking at things like puzzles and creativity and learning, that was really strong with our female respondents. We also looked at it in terms of age. So we compared 30s to 20s first because we had equal numbers of respondents in those categories. Here you can see that relaxation is pretty even, but things like immersion and fantasy and role-playing become more important to people as they get a little bit older. Also, the idea of using games just to pass time was something that people responded stronger to in the 20s category than the 30s category. And then we also looked at it for 50 plus and people in their 40s. We didn't have as many respondents, so this data is a little bit more erratic. But my big takeaway from this was that people who are in their 50s, they really focus on the games they're playing. Like they sit down and they play a game. And it's not so much like a, oh yeah, I'll do this for fun experience, which is good to keep in mind when you're designing things that need to work for that population. So some other stuff, we found the most popular games on all three sort of platforms for different groups. So people in their 20s, Clash of Clans was like the most popular mobile game. Things like Overwatch and League of Legends and Call of Duty, stuff that's very competitive, was really popular for people in these age groups. Then when we get to the 30s, Candy Crush comes soaring into the top charts, right? So it's pushing those competitive experiences back. Civilization overtakes Overwatch. So this idea of taking time and sitting down and building something becomes more important to people. And while we still have Call of Duty, we started to see more of these narrative experiences come in as people got older. Then we've got 40s. My favorite thing about the 40s data was that Grand Theft Auto like slammed onto our charts. Apparently a ton of people in their 40s really like Grand Theft Auto, which I thought was kind of interesting. But this idea of like liking a chaos engine and stuff like that is really popular. Also Binding of Isaac weirdly was popular within this age group. And then finally 50s, you've got a lot of board gamey stuff, right? Which makes sense because it's focused. Madden, but then I thought it was really cute that we had a lot of older people who like are sitting down with Resident Evil and Zelda and having a nice time on a Sunday. So short on time, so we'll go fast here. How does this get applied, right? So we might say, okay, we want to make a game for this person. She's 57. Well, why don't we make a game that focuses on completion, simple mechanics, and aesthetics? And that'll be more effective for her because we know what she likes. We could also look at a boy who's 15 who wants to learn about science. We're going to make a game that has competition, experimentation, and helps him feel like he's building skills. And then we want to make something for someone who's 31 and is learning about caring for a foster child. Well, we want to make something relaxing, puzzle-driven, social connections. So why ask why, right? Well, this really is not an excuse for empathy. This isn't like, oh, I don't have to empathize, I have this cheat sheet. For us, this is really a cool exercise in empathy. It's a way for us to practice reaching out to others who don't have our perception, to say, what would they like? Let's practice that empathy in a more active setting. Because really, like if we want to affect this large-scale change, we're going to have many, many hands building that change. So we might as well make the tools that fit those hands best and give them the greatest chance at success. So, thank you.